All right, let's talk about how I built and found my strategies and edges in crypto. So, again, I want to repeat why this stuff is so important because when I was writing this up and creating this, I was thinking to myself, like, man, this stuff just feels weird to talk about. It doesn't feel super specific. It just feels like people are going to get bored, blah, blah, blah. And I was just thinking, like, no, like, I need to explain to you guys how I made my edge, how I came across it, how I built it, because I think it's insightful for you to understand my journey of going from someone who didn't make money in crypto to someone who did make money in crypto. And that jump from not making money to making money came down to me having a strategy and having a clearly defined edge in the market. And I want to show you in this video how I built my strategy and my edge by backstepping, showing you like conversations that I had, networks I was in. How did I actually come up with the shit that I use today to make money, right? Because if you're watching this, you probably don't have an edge. You probably don't have a strategy. Your strategy is probably like copy some guy on Twitter and find coins early with good tech, right? Some bullshit, or copy trade this guy, or buy when this algorithm says buy, and then no sell strategy. Like, a lot of you guys have incomplete strategies. So I want to show you how I built mine because I think this should be helpful. So let's start off with number one, the long-term investing system. How did I build this? Now, the long-term investing system, again, just to remind you, is my Hunter algorithm. This is it on the Ethereum chart. So you can see you buy low, you sell high. How did I build this? How did I design this? Well, the journey began in about June 2021. So it's December 2023. So about 2.5 years ago, I think, if my math is correct. I've been investing, obviously, since 2017. But what I realized was I had a big fascination with figuring out like which data sets showed me it was the bottom. What data said bottom? What data says top? Like, I just wanted to answer this question for myself. I really wanted to know, like, what tools are buying bottoms and selling tops? How do I know when to buy? Because I always wanted to just know when to buy and when to sell without really having to like guess. I didn't want to have to guess. I just wanted to have data that showed me, opportune times. And I was looking at all the data sets. I looked at everything. I looked at the on-chain, the fear and the greed index, unrealized profit and loss, technical analysis, RSI divergences, MACD, the whole, fucking suite of tools that people use to try to build strategies. And I ultimately came to the conclusion after about 4 years of searching, 3.5 years of searching, that funding data was my favorite data set that I had found so far. Now, funding data, I came across it from this tweet here from Loomdart. He basically said that, remember how at $10,300, your Twitter feed was full of people talking about negative funding, yet the price still went up after? It's because funding is the primary source of social consensus on if Bitcoin is going up or down. It doesn't matter if people talk about it or not. Funding is a core part of the market. It's not biased or manipulated. It's just there. A situation where funding is a trap doesn't exist. So I was fascinated. I was like, wow, I've seen funding mentioned by this guy before, but this really puts it into perspective. What other data sets in crypto can every single person look at and the data set still works, right? Funding is the only data set which doesn't suffer from what's called alpha decay. Alpha decay refers to the alpha disappearing when everyone looks at it, right? Imagine no one knew the ETF came out tomorrow, right? That's alpha. But imagine everyone figured out that the ETF was coming out tomorrow. That's alpha decay, right? The alpha disappears because people find out about it. But this doesn't happen with funding, right? Because funding, when it's negative, is showing that people are more bearish than bullish. So if everyone looks at the funding data and sees that it's negative, it doesn't matter that everyone's looking at it, because the market, if the funding is negative, is still bearish, right? So it doesn't matter how many people look at negative funding at the bottom, it's still the bottom because the funding's negative, right? It's still a reflection of sentiment. And so that's what really fascinated me about this data. And no one had really made any algorithms integrating funding data, and I was like, why? Like, I love this data. It's so cool. Like, it's the best data I've come across for buying bottoms and selling tops that I've ever seen. And I made a guide talking about this It was called like the Bitcoin Swing Trade Strategy Guide. I made that in like 2020 sometime. And, I studied everything this guy loomed up, put out. And, it just made sense to me that negative funding represents bearish sentiment, and negative funding always happened at the bottom. And I was like, okay, this is the tool. But funding data by itself wasn't accurate enough, because what would often happen is you'd have price doing this, right? Let's say this is flat. Let's say below here is negative, right? The funding would be like this, or maybe it would be like, it would be like this, right? The funding would be negative, but if you bought when the funding first went negative, you lost money as the price went down here. So funding by itself was not good enough. And this is when I realized that I needed to somehow build a system. And so what happened was, in this network that I'm in, this guy Zane messaged me because I was talking about funding data all the time. He sent me this message, June 2021. He said, "Hi, Daniel." He's working on a tool to just show funding data. And it was partly inspired by my attention to funding rates as an unbiased entry signal. And basically what he did was he just aggregated the hourly funding rates into a daily, and then multiplying that to get a 365-day APR. And I was like, oh, that's cool. This guy knows some coding stuff. And so this is what I said to him. I said, something would be cool that somehow compares moving average to open and close price, to funding level, distance from moving average plus funding, some sort of dip buying algo based on this. Honestly, it'd be cool to design an automated discretionary dip buying strategy for this group that I was in, right? Make it a monthly service, lever our brands. Most guys would pay, and it'd make sense because most people wouldn't buy at good prices. The Hunter algorithms in the form that they are in today is exactly what I wanted to build 2.5 years ago, because I had been studying funding data and I realized, holy shit, this data is really good, but by itself it's not good enough. So let me explain what I saw in funding data, right? Let's pretend, let's draw some price. Let's pretend this is the price, right? Up, down, right? And funding data was, let's draw a straight line, right? This is the funding data. So price is going up, funding data is going positive, right? Funding data is going positive, funding data is going negative, positive, right? So funding data by itself never could be used really to buy a bottom or sell a top. It just showed you the general sentiment. But what I thought was, well, price has what's called reflexivity. And reflexivity is the concept of price going further down than people expect and further up than people expect because of feedback loops and because of the underlying volatility of the asset, the inability to give it a fair valuation, and its drive from sentiment and flows. And so if price is dropped a lot below what it typically drops below, and the funding is negative, that's probably a sign for a bottom. That's what I was thinking to myself 2.5 years ago, right? So I thought, okay, funding data here isn't that important because price is not very far below its moving average. Let's pretend that this is its moving average, right? This is the moving average of price. Let's make this a different color. So I thought, okay, well, why don't I say for a buy signal, I need price a certain percent below the moving average and negative funding. That's what I told my developer, right? This is what I told my dev like fucking 2.5 years ago. I said, distance from moving average, right? So the distance from the green line, and funding. So, funding is negative when it's below the red line, and it's positive when it's above the red line. And when you get a combination of this distance and this negative funding, this would be a buy signal, right? And this is what you see on the chart for Bitcoin right now. You can see that there's a green line. When price goes below the green line, right, that's when you get the buy signals. There's no buy signals above the green line because price has to go below it to trigger a signal. Same for the red side. Now this is different here. Sorry, where is it? No, you can see actually all the signals for the selling are above the red line, right? Above the red line. Okay, so that's how I built the system. Just to give you an example of how you build data. So I told him what I wanted. He turned it into code. Now we made the hunter algorithms. And we've consistently updated it over time. The system is a lot more complex than what it was then. Like, you're not going to go, oh, I can just recode Daniel's algo now. No, it's way more complex. You're never going to be able to figure it out. And funding data isn't as useful now. You're going to have to add other data sets in. But that's where it started, right? So how do you build your own investing system? I've showed you how I built mine. How do you build your own? Well, number one, as you could tell, I studied for thousands of hours how markets work. I was looking at all the data sets, studying funding data, and I realized what data is accurately predicting tops and bottoms, and I was understanding what drives market cycles. I had already in my mind coded my investing system. I just had to have someone turn it into code. That's the beauty of this, right? I knew what was going to work. And a lot of people, they try to code algorithms by just putting in a bunch of variables, and then when they find one that's accurate, they oh yeah, I found an accurate system. Why would random variables that you put in be accurate? What's that based on? It's arbitrary combinations of numbers that luckily spit out a profitable combination when you look into the past, but there's no guarantee that that's accurate into the future because you didn't base the data off of anything. But when I built my system, right, now you don't have to code your system. You can just have it fully manual saying, I need this data to show this. But when I built this system, I knew it was going to work because I'd already seen it working, right? I already knew, okay, price is down heaps below the moving average and the funding's negative. Oh, it was a bottom. Well, no shit, right? I could just tell. So that's number one. Number two, when you find something that you like, test it. So I found the funding data and I started testing it with my developer. And, you have to test it in the future and in the past. So I've been forward testing this algo for 2.5 years. Excuse me, 2.5 years of forward testing. We've been using it for 2.5 years, and you have to look at how accurate it is. When you find something that works, test for the range of how big the range it's accurate in. So for example, right, the exemplar I gave before, some dude will just fucking make an algo and, when 10 MA goes below 9 MA, set a buy signal, right? And he put in 76543, the moving average, and then it was only the 8 moving average that was profitable. And he's like, oh yeah, that's a good system. No, because you have to look at how big of a range could you adjust the numbers and have the system still work. If you needed the 59 moving average to go over the 73 moving average for your algorithm to work, and if you change it from 59 to 58, it doesn't work, that range of accuracy is non-existent. That's a bad system, because a system that does not have flexibility is a bad system, because the markets change over time. And if the market even changes slightly, the system is no longer accurate. Okay? So you have real data when you know that you can change the range of numbers and it will still be semi-accurate or very accurate. That's good data. So what I realized with the funding data was, with this algorithm, the reason it's been working so well into the future for so long is when I tested the algorithm, we tried a bunch of different ranges. We said, okay, funding data has to go this low, or this low, or this low. And then we said, okay, price has to go this far below the moving average, or this low, or this low. We realized, holy shit, we have a really large range of data that we can put into this, and it's still profitable. It still works. It still buys near the bottom, sells near the top. And it's not perfect, but it's a very good compass. Okay? As well, networking is so important. How did I meet this Zane guy? Well, I was in a network online and I was giving value. I was sharing my insights about funding data. I was, meeting people, going to events, etc. So network is so important. If I